Center for Public Interest Law. A very good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Morning to you.
Of course, we are here to talk about using public service to spur COVID-19 economic recovery, the 8th National Conference on Cultural, Social and Economic Rights. What should we know about this? I do know that the theme is reclaiming social services for an inclusive and sustainable socio-economic recovery after COVID-19. But what is this all about?
Well, thank you so much, Romeo. This is the 8th National ESCR conference that has been hosted by the School of Law, Macquarie University, together with other partners. This is a conference that has been running since 2014. In 2014, we did discuss promoting economic, social, cultural rights and their justiciability. In 2015, we went on to talk about social inclusion and service delivery. Then we built the story towards business, human rights, and holding corporations accountable. We also talked about local governments and service delivery. We talked about SDGs and service delivery. So you discover that the whole narrative around this conference has to do with service delivery.
And I've also discovered that that face mask is stifling your ability to speak, and the viewer is missing out on that vital information, Mr. Sedeko.
Sorry,
and these are social distancing indeed. So let's get back. From the top, the 8th Annual National Conference on Socio-Economic and Cultural Rights. Why are we holding it?
Thank you, Romeo. Apologies, viewers.
Indeed.
We talk of the 8th National Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Conference that is usually hosted by the School of Law, Macquarie University, together with other partners, including the Initiative of Social and Economic Rights, the Public Interest Law Clinic, the Uganda Consortium on Corporate Accountability, and definitely Uganda Human Rights Commission. This is a conference that began in 2014, and in 2014 the question then was the justiciability of economic, social and social rights in Uganda. And then in 2015 we went talked about social inclusion and service delivery. In 2016 we talked about business and human rights, holding corporations accountable in the realm of human rights. We've had a conference that dealt with the SDGs and service delivery, local governments and service delivery. Last year, because it was an election year, we dealt with election promises, accountability and service delivery. So this year, 2021, we come to talk about reclaiming public services for inclusive and sustainable and economic recovery post COVID-19.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so the context of the conference, we all know that COVID-19 has devastated us as a country. And it has hit not only the economy, but also the social life of Ugandans.
Right.
And then the response measures that have been put in place to curb the spread, but also manage the spread, have also hit us socially and hit us economically. Yes, there have been attempts towards a stimulation recovery through the economy, but it has not had the effect it should have had. And we know that as a country we are
talking about the COVID-19 relief funds.
That's right. And we know that as a country we are definitely challenged whenever it comes to our response to disasters. While we are grappling with COVID-19, you hear of floods in the western part of the country. You hear of locusts in the north and eastern part of the country. Then you hear of the rising levels of waters in Lake Victoria. And then you hear of landslides. So we are at a place where we are saying that what COVID-19 has done, it has laid us bare as a country in as far as our social services and public services are concerned. And it is the reason that we are coming to talk about these issues. So this morning you are sharing the statistics as per the COVID-19 status of Uganda this morning. We are talking of 121,000 people confirmed cases, but we have only been able to take 1.6 million samples. After 1 year and almost a half, we are only able to take samples of 1.6 million people, of the 44+ million people we have in Uganda. So the question is, has our health system been responsive? You will agree with me that when we had the outbreak of the pandemic, the one thing everybody celebrated was that we are going to have a revampation of our health system. Did it happen?
It didn't happen, and we're still talking about a health system whereby 51% of our health facilities are owned privately.
That is right.
Yet we do know that when the COVID-19 pandemic wreaked havoc on the livelihoods of many of our Ugandans, their pockets diminished, meaning they couldn't go to the private health facilities.
That's
they
right.
had to clamor for the free services under government, which were largely non-existent.
And we're not only talking about health, Romeo, we're also talking about education.
Indeed.
Every cry of the parent and the child right now is, when will schools be opened? We had an opportunity last year to put in place structures, systems, laws to manage the pandemic in our schools.
Yes,
did we as a country?
No.
We did not. Talk of social security.
NSSF.
And not just NSSF, any social security for Ugandans as a whole. In the first lockdown, what were the three hot commodities? Masks, posho, beans. When we came to the second lockdown, the Nabanja's money came in. And Nabanja's money is targeting the people in the informal sector. What happens in Uganda? Who did access this money? A good number of people who are not even in the informal sector. So we talk about social security, and as a country, we have focused our social security only for the people in the formal sector. The question is, can we have a discussion and revisit our structure on social security so that we can include even the informal sector? That is a sector that has been most hit by COVID-19.
Indeed.
And that is a sector that will always be most hit by any pandemic.
By the informal sector, we're talking about the small-sized, small and medium-sized enterprises. We did put some 1 trillion Uganda shillings in UDB, Uganda Development Bank. Some 455 billion was approved. But guess what? That money did not trickle down to the SMEs. That money did not trickle down to the informal sector. It went to big business, directed malls within Kampala.
Romeo,
can you imagine?
How much of that money got to the roadside vendor? How much of that money got to the market vendor? How much of that money go to the hawker?
I had a market vendor here 2 weeks ago. She actually broke down on this morning show. She was saying, we've been grappling, there's been nothing coming in from the government, no social recoveries, stimulus packages that have been according to them. So imagine you called for a lockdown, people are not on the streets vending, so they're at home grappling with poverty.
That's right.
And there's no stimulus package. She broke down on this set here.
Now
that's how bad it is.
That is our social security. We go to water and electricity. Remember in the first lockdown, there was the issue of how do we settle water bills in an economy where people are not working, people are not earning. And the best we could do as a country is to say, we shall not suspend the payment of the bills, but we are only asking National Water not to shut down the water supply at a time when we badly needed the water. Something with electricity. And then the electricity did not help because we have Yaka in place. It is prepaid. You pay to access. If you've not paid, you will not access. So what programs are in place to ensure that even the most vulnerable of people has access to health, has access to education, has access to electricity, has access to water, has access to food, has access to social security? And that is the whole essence of this conference.
Where is the biggest problem coming from? That's what we want to know, Athan Siriko. Where is the biggest problem coming from? Is it the privatization of public social services, in that the government privatized these roles and all mandates to the private companies?
Two things. Government has failed to get its priorities right, but also privatization then comes in. Our priorities should be in education, should be in health. But look at the budget allocations of this year. Health suffered an almost 9.2% decline from last year's budget allocations. Education suffered a 1.2% decline in budget allocations from last year's. And these are what we would consider to be the critical, basic public services. And then what happens? We privatize. We allow a free economy. Then when we have a second lockdown, students cannot leave the old taxi park or bus parks to go home. What happens? Then the state must come in and mobilize transport. And yet, ideally, we would have expected the state to have a transport system in place to address such issues. So, what is it with privatization? You have allowed the private player to set the price. Today, I will charge you for 20,000 to reach that country destination. Tomorrow, it will be at my free will to charge you 150. Something with the hospitals. The biggest outcry we had in the second lockdown was access to a hospital, access to oxygen, access to Covidex, and the others. Those three. Where would you find the oxygen, the hospitals, etc.? People run to private players, and private players will always set their prices. Can we have a control over them? I do not think so, because this is a free market economy. So until government takes back its duty, primary duty of providing these social services, these economic services to the masses, we shall continue in this problem.
But guess what? There is a social services that is in the need right now, and that is the education sector.
Oh, yes.
Many of the parents are saying our students, our young learners are getting pregnant in the thousands. That's what we are getting. Arua, Gulu, Kabale, Lira. Many of these young teenagers are getting pregnant left, right, and center. So they are saying we should be reopening schools as soon as yesterday. But then a tweet came out from the First Lady. Janet Katam, 7 yesterday. She said, stop threatening me, stop holding me at gunpoint. Schools are not reopening anytime soon, simply because we shut them down because we feel like we want to safeguard the livelihoods of our young learners. Do you think young learners are safer in the communities and not in the school settings? Because she said they could actually be carriers of COVID-19 and then take it to their parents who might actually succumb. She related the whole issue to the HIV epidemic, and she said Uganda grappled with child-headed families after many of the parents actually passed on. So she said if the children who have a high immunity contract the disease from the schools, they'll take it back home to the parents, because most of the learners are day scholars. They'll take it back to their homes, infect the parents will succumb, and will end up with child-headed families. Do you buy that analogy? Should we just expedite other measures to ensure that we work in the new normal and shouldn't go back to school?
I think this should be the biggest lesson we took from our failure to manage and handle the first wave of COVID-19.
I see.
The wave came, we reopened schools, and then there is an outbreak even in the schools, and we are forced to close down the schools unceremoniously. The Luganda phrase, abana bagwanga, these are children of the country, of the state, of the government. And so the question is, what has the government done to ensure that these issues are in place? And it still all goes back to the issue of choosing to privatize a basic, necessary public service, social service.
Like health.
Like health and education. So we don't have structures in school. Yes, we want to safeguard our children. But the question is, what is there for us to show that we have done A, B, C, D towards that safeguarding? Even in the communities that there are, we promise televisions, we promise radios, we promise learning materials. The question is, did these get to the learners? So it is a catch-22. And for us, we will not look at the parents. We will not look at the communities. We go back to the people that we gave the mandate.
The government.
The government. If some people will say, oh, no, probably we did not give them the mandate, well, we shall go back to the people who voluntarily assumed the risk of responsibility, and that is the state. So we shall hold the government accountable, we shall hold the president accountable, we shall hold the first lady accountable as Minister of Education. We shall continue pushing Minister of Education to sort this issue out. Otherwise, the children are not safe out there.
Maybe they really want to reopen schools, but they do not know how to do it. Could you interest us with the measures or avenues through which the government
could be able to expedite its
safe reopening?
Here is a conference where different players are coming to suggest practical, workable ways. Government,
break them down.
The practical ways?
Yes.
Number one, can we go back and set our priorities right? It all begins with budget allocations.
I hear you.
Number two,
we saw the decreases when it comes to the budget allocations, health, education, human capital development, and so forth. Go ahead.
Yes. Can government take back the responsibility, the primary duty of providing the education, monitoring the education, and evaluating the education, as opposed to leaving it wholly to the private players?
Indeed, I was looking at the literature, Arthur, and this is what came to my mind. Was it 36% of the primary schools are privately owned? And they're seeing enrollment of at least 21%. They've been actually enrolling students at a pace of 1% per annum per year for the last 10 years, which is good news for the private sector. But then they are too exorbitant when it comes to the fees being paid. And I also look at the aggregation, 66% of the secondary schools are also privately owned. Another callous development, because you're in Gombe Secondary School, which is supposedly to be a government school, but my sisters are paying 1 million shillings every term. I was like, is this a government school or a privately owned school? Go ahead.
And that has led to the
privatizing education.
That has led to the disparities that we have when it comes to access and even the quality of the education. Yes, you'll be told, if you want quality education, go to the private schools. What about the UPE, USCE schools that government established and owned as their own?
Well, the parents will tell you there are so many students in UPE, there are so many students in USE, and there is a low quality of teachers within the USE and UPE schools. So they would actually opt for the private schools.
And it's because government, as regulator, as monitor, as inspector, has failed in its role to ensure that we have that balanced quality, the other quality that we are looking for in those government-aided UCE, UPE primary schools.
A viewer who is watching would be like, okay, we've been calling for public-private partnerships, and they would think that it is indeed a good idea or a good thing or a good factor when you hear that, okay, 66% of the secondary schools are owned by private entities. They will think that this is good news because they are offering a hand to the government. But explain to the viewer why it is a bad recipe for disaster.
If we are talking about a social service, a basic right, we need to be much guarded about the private partnerships.
Indeed.
Much guarded about the private partnerships. Yes, we can have the private partnerships, but the question is, how much control does the government have over these persons that it has opted to enter into with a partnership?
I hear you.
For as long as we do not have the government hand in there and role in there, then we are going to still lose it like we have already lost.
By government's role, you mean government reining in on the skyrocketing school fees?
Government needs to be present.
Streamline the money?
Government needs to be present right from January to December to January in the entire process, including setting of school fees or tuition fees, including the type and nature of teaching, including the assessments, including the grading, name it. So it's not a matter of once we enter into a private-public partnership with somebody, once I pay the salaries of the teachers, then I have delivered on my mandate as government. It goes beyond that.
Do you think government has failed in its mandate to actually streamline the fees in this regard?
Well, you've just talked about the majority of Ugandans crying foul. Even those that take their children to those private schools, well aware about the cost, are also crying foul about the cost. And that is an indictment on government failure to regulate the social service.
Go ahead.
So this we come to a place where we need, first of all, to take stock of our policies, our laws, our systems, our structures, our practices in the context of social services, public service.
Arthur, I'm glad I'm having this conversation. There is a huge disparity when it comes to the inequalities that we've been seeing. Do you know that international schools are still operating right now? Students right now in classes, online. But the student in Chaz, in Masaka is not studying. The one in Gulu, in the rural areas who do not have internet are not actually studying. These stark disparities when it comes to the inequality gap. Don't you think we're going to be knee-deep in mire if this situation is not reversed?
We have been deep in there, and it is good that it has been brought out to the fore. The disparity and the fact that it is now public knowledge that there is this category of schools that are running and operating while others are under total lockdown. Now, it pains me to go into the narrative of, and the children of the regulators are the ones that go to these international schools. Can we as a country get to a place where we have an inclusive, sustainable public service. By inclusive, I mean we are taking care of the child of the most vulnerable, most poor of Ugandans.
Well, guess what? The people rendering this social service, the teachers, will largely not make it back into the schools. That's what we are hearing from many of the experts who are saying many of these teachers ventured in other profitable businesses like brick making. Can you imagine? Border riding, and they feel like they shouldn't go back into the space of teaching and so forth. That is another callous development.
Because of the uncertainties we created. Today the schools are open, tomorrow they are closed. We issue a calendar or a roadmap towards the next term or year of academics, and then we suspend that calendar to a later date. And yet the teachers must survive. The teachers must fend for their families. So what have they opted to do? They have gone for what they think is a more certain way of raising their survival. And that is the bricklaying, that is the border riding. But even wherever they have gone into an informal sector. And questions of social security will definitely catch up on them if we do not, as a country, take interest in securing their social security.
Another callous development pertains to the fact that the private entities or schools have been sold off. Many have been grappling with loans. We are talking about an education sector that is largely privately owned. And then if we are saying private schools are being sold off and turned into accommodation centers, where you do have a former student now coming back into this school setting as an accommodation area. So prostitution is taking center stage within the same schools as accommodation centers now. But then the big idea is that the schools are being sold off by the private entities in that regard. Yet they are the majority of the players in this sphere. Don't you think this is a problem?
Roma, you're being modest by saying accommodation centers.
Lodges.
Lodges. The byline was nursery school turned into a lodge.
Indeed.
And this all goes back to the question of uncertainties about our public service, about our social services.
Yes, yes.
It definitely pains Ugandans. And it is the reason that as Ugandans, we now need to hold the people we've given a mandate accountable. We need to contribute to the discourse and coming up with solutions to aid and support a cleaning up of our public service. Yes.
Wow, a cleaning up of our public service. Let's talk about the real economy. The National Development Plan 3 is actually focusing on the real economy. Do you think this is going to be a good recipe for us? ICT, focusing on the real economy. Will it actually advance better social services as the NDP 3?
Oh, NDP 3 talks about education, it talks about electricity, it talks about health, it talks about
the chorus.
The cause, and talks about human resource or capital development. Very critical. Now the question is, are we able to deliver on this NDP 3? NDP 3, these are commitments that we have made as a country. Of course, somebody will say government should be at the helm of the NDP 3. And the NDP 3 also provides for strategies, clear strategies that ideally would point us to a better system in as far as our public services are concerned, in as far as our social services are concerned. So in the NDP 3, we have a solution. If only we can, if only we can deliver on it. And as I said right from the beginning, I'll say it, and without fear or favor, it all begins with budget allocations. Our priorities will best be read if we look at where we have put our pocket.
You know, we are going to go for a short break, Arthur, but then when we return on to talk about the traders, the people who have been grappling the most during this COVID-19 lockdown. We do have projections that actually contend that, yes, our traders in this country might not go back to pre-pandemic economic levels by 2023. So meaning they are operating within the negatives as we speak. But then what did government do? We put money in UDB, which went to big business. That's something I want to task you on. We also do know that according to you, boss, the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, we have 8 million people who are below the poverty line. And they contend, yes, as we speak, between 800,000 to 2.6 million might fall. Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us right here on Morning at NTV. We are still talking about, yes, What actually social services right here in Uganda? Privatization of public social services has actually rendered the services obsolete. When we talk about 36% actually percent of our primary schools being privately owned, what comes to your mind? When we talk about 66% of our secondary schools being privately owned, what comes to your mind? When we say 51% of our health care facilities are privately owned, what comes to your mind? When Ugandans cannot afford health care and they have to run for free services, but when they get there, they are told, no, you have to buy drug X from private facility Y. That's when the situation becomes very, very, very degenerative. We also do know that private schools are being sold off. So what does that mean? When we reopen, there won't be schools to accommodate all the learners. Private teachers are largely not making any money, and they've veered into other ventures, meaning they won't be able to go back to the schools to actually entertain a meager pay. So what exactly are we dealing with? There's also the issue of the real economy, the traders, people who are grappling left, right, and center. We're going to be talking about that and a lot more with Arthur. Let's continue and talk about the grappling traders. I told you that they might not go to pre-pandemic economic levels. By 2023, they are operating in the negatives, and we're talking about the majority being women. Go ahead.
Romeo, we are talking of a country which prior to the pandemic, we had over 2.6 million Ugandans living below the national poverty line. Now, Minister of Finance tells us by the time we come out of this pandemic, we shall have another 2.6 added to the other. Sorry, actually, prior to the pandemic, it was 8 million.
8 million poor
8
people.
million poor people. Post-pandemic, that is if we survive it, we have over 2.6 million people who stand the risk. And part of these 2.6 are the traders. We are talking of the informal traders. We are talking of the small and medium. I've not even gone to the level of those business moguls who are running the big business magnates here in this country. When we have a pandemic that hits and we continue expecting them to pay rent as usual for a period that they have not earned.
Pay electricity
when we
as usual.
Continue expecting them to pay electricity as usual for a period they have not been earning.
I like where you're headed.
When we, as part of a way to handle the push we've suffered from the pandemic, we choose to raise the taxes as a way of covering the gap, the budget shortfalls. We are risking the trader. And that trader is part of that basic structure of our economy. If the traders fall out of this business, we are going to have a whole spiral. That trader is a bread earner. That trader is a parent. And we are in a country where we have extended family ties. That one trader could be supporting over 30 or even 50 members of his extended family. And then we do not have programs in place to cushion this particular trader. This is going to spiral, and it's going to hit all the other sectors of this economy. And that is why, as a country, we need to pay special attention to this trader.
We need to, or we must pay attention, because we're talking about an informal sector that is largely 85%. These are people, is it 75%? Yes, 75% of the businesses in this country are in the informal sector. This shouldn't be a conversation. We were actually asking ourselves, why is government adamant to help these people actually during this COVID-19 pandemic? You're putting now a new set of taxes that are going to wreak havoc on people who are largely not making any money. Arthur,
Romeo,
what is the problem?
We tried the narrative of we must as a government, or we must as a country. That narrative did not seem to bear forth any fruit. So we are now appealing. We get to that point where we do what? We appeal. But our appealing does not mean there will not come a time when we shall say this must have been in place. This should have been in place. And so that's why I say we need, as a country, and I'm appealing to the policymakers, I'm appealing to Parliament, I'm appealing to the office of the Prime Minister as head of government business. Can we get our priorities right and focus on those small economies within the larger economy, on which the majority of Ugandans do survive.
Indeed. And then we did say, okay, let's put aside some money, 100,000 Uganda shillings for the taxi. For the taxi operators, border riders, single mothers, and all these other people who are grappling, the vulnerable group. But then guess what? Where did the money go?
Corruption.
Where did the money go?
Corruption.
The councillors, the leaders who are supposed to be helping people actually earmark their friends and relatives for the same money. Go ahead.
And we would like it, Parliament should not only stop at telling us data entrants got their names onto the list of beneficiaries. We need to find out who are these data entrants, how did they get into this structure of entering data. You will be shocked, Romeo, or God forbid, to find that these are relatives or close friends of the same people to whom this program was handed to run at the local government level. So corruption. And yes, we've had the narrative from the president, this Kisanja, the same narrative we had about the no to corruption. Prime Minister comes in, the Right Honorable Nabanja, she says corruption. We need to see an end to corruption in the public service and social services.
Do you think the biggest problem is the softness with which the government leaders have approached this problem of corruption? The fact that we've not seen punitive punishments being levied against those who have been caught in the midst of these corruptive tendencies?
Number one, the uncoordinated troops.
Okay.
We have multiple institutions or entities we have put in place to address a single societal vice. And it is good that right now the narrative is, can we cut down on the administrative costs of running government? Let us merge institutions, let us merge authorities with ministries and the like. Can we also merge the institutions that are meant to address issues? There's been a proposal to merge Uganda Human Rights Commission with the Equal Opportunities Commission.
Yes.
So why don't we also merge whoever is meant to be fighting corruption, such that we have one troop that moves out to advance against this corruption? Two, patronage. I'll say this without fear still. In most cases,
the international
we are
democracy
promoting
Please speak.
patronage, where we must reward certain people for certain actions. And once they are corrupt, then we shall hold that red card in the air, just waiting to raise it to them because of an act of abuse of office, an act of embezzlement, and the like. So until, as a country, we deliberate and say we are going to deal with corruption to the root, and it is corruption right from until the even at LC1, even at LC2, where somebody says I cannot sign off a given document until they even set the price of 50,000. That one goes for 20,000, and we're in a country where we require documents like no man's business.
Indeed.
If I don't have this introductory letter from the LC1, I will not access this particular service. So I will part with that 50,000 because that 50,000 is going to get me a letter that is going to get me into a door of 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000. So corruption is one of the issues that we need, or we must.
Can you
address.
imagine even those few people who received the 100,000 saw it reduced by the proprietors of the same money?
Oh yes.
Not only the COVID-19 relief, even M-Yoga.
That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
You must be charged to access a basic social service. You must be charged to access a basic public service. And this is taxpayers' money. This is taxpayers' money. And still, these people who are meant to access this money are taxpayers in a way. They do pay VAT. They do pay VAT. Tomorrow they'll board a taxi, and the taxi or bus will charge them, and part of that charge is a fuel tax, because the owner of the buses or the taxi will not allow to incur that particular cost. And then you're asking them you're charging that 100,000 that you have passed on to them.
Arthur, if you are grappling in your house, poverty has eaten you to the core, left, right, and center, and then you give me a clarion call, like Romeo Busiku, send me some food. Then I send a messenger. I'm like, okay, you're in Nansana, I'm in Bunga, I'm going to send you some food. I have a messenger on the line. So this messenger somehow disappears with the food. Have I helped you, Arthur?
No, you have not.
No, I haven't. The messenger took away your food. So the analogy is that if we had earmarked this money to help vulnerable people and the money did not reach them, they are still grappling with those vulnerabilities and shocks. Should we be talking about redistributing this money or COVID-19 relief funds to people because they did not receive the money?
Should we go back there? Haven't we
Change the messenger, but continue.
Haven't we learned lessons?
Go ahead.
So before we even launch a second batch of 53 billion shillings, we need to go back and ask ourselves, did this work? Did the food distribution actually work?
The idea is that, and the analogy I gave you is that the money did not reach the vulnerable people. Should we be talking about expediting another exercise to redistribute money? Because the more we talk about, oh, so-and-so did not receive the money, so-and-so blah, 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 the money was cut off. People are dying of hunger. People are grappling with poverty within their homes. Should we actually sit down and say, okay, corrupt people took away this money, the vulnerable people are still grappling. 8 million poor people are no longer poor, they are now vulnerable. 2.6 more million people are going to also fall into the vulnerability gap. What are we doing as government to ensure that we position ourselves in a greater state to be able to help these people?
Our problem is for us deciding on what the best solution to a problem we are not facing should be. And this is where the human rights-based approach comes in, participation.
Civil society participation.
Exactly. If I'm supposed to be a beneficiary of a given system, can you allow me participate in drawing up and implementing the system? We have a tendency of comparanizing everything. The solutions come from the center and they are sent out there. We decide on what is best for the land flood victims in Kasese. We decide on what is best for the mudslide victims in eastern Uganda. They are totally not part of the process, and we have not empowered them to even hold accountable that messenger that we have sent. So can we change that narrative and go back to the fact that even in designing these responses, can we begin by going to the grassroots?
Meaning we shouldn't ring fence these interventions to the executive, involve other stakeholders, parliamentarians who are in close proximity with their constituents, civil society actors like yourself.
Strange is when you go to parliament and say, we need money, 53 billion. Parliament passes the money, but then you say you cannot be part of, and then you send parliament later on to go and find out whether actually the 53 billion did reach. There is no single process of government that should be happening without the hand of parliament. Not a single process of government should happen without a law, without a motion, without resource allocation from parliament. But where we have decisions that are coming from the executive to allocate money, to decide on who does what, without parliamentary involvement, then we have abused the system and we are equally responsible for the other messenger who decided to run away with the money, because the messenger knows there are already flaws in the system.
Arthur, mind-boggling conversation we are having here on Morning at NTV. Go ahead.
So, we get to a point where we say, can we stop and take lessons? We did not ever stop to take lessons from the failed food distribution. I'll be honest with you, soul searching. I received the posho and the beans in the first lockdown.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I did. And somebody comes at where I stay, there is a gate. The people in there are all salaried earners. I'm not saying salaried from government, but at least they are salaried earners. And we received the food. But I know it very well that that food was ideally meant for the indigent, poor, underserved.
Government officials also received this food, they were telling me.
Well, I passed it on to somebody who needed it better. So in all these responses to disaster, responses to shocks in life, we need as a country to stop and take lessons. The idea of, okay, the food failed, we now send money. Money to do what? Well, yes, 100,000. For how many beneficiaries? 53,000 people. Actually, 53,000 households. Do we only have 53,000 indigent, vulnerable, underserved households in Uganda? No. So, before we rush into any response, we need to take lessons from failed
aggregations of data.
And that, exactly.
If they do not know that, they do not have the data, how will they be able to help the people? If you do not know that 10 people are hungry,
why don't we have the data? Romeo, why don't we have the data? As a country that has put in place UBOS, a country that has put in place NIRA, irrespective of the ways in which it was established, a country that has put in place different data collection centers. How do you wake up tomorrow and say, I do not have the data?
You have gender ministry that said 500,000 households have vulnerable people. Then you both say, you're joking. 8 million Ugandans are poor. They've been surviving on $1 or below. And they contended that more people might have fallen below the poverty line. And these people who were poor before the pandemic might have fallen into the vulnerability gap as COVID-19 continued to eat through their finances and so forth.
Whose mandate is it to give us those numbers? Is it gender? Or is it UBOS? And that's what I talked about, the uncoordinated troops.
And that's where civil society would have come
and that's where
to
civil
help
society,
you. But what are we seeing against the civil society?
We are gagging, looking up, actually deciding on what the nature of what business they should be doing.
Why are you very, very adamant to not let these things go away? Why are you, poking your nose in issues that don't concern you? Why are you talking about poor people? You're trying to paint us in a bad image to the international community. You want us to be seen as people who are not working so that people can rise up and remove this government. Is that really what civil society is doing? Because what we've largely seen is you as civil society lending a hand to government and telling them, okay, government, you've helped 10 people. But when we came to this area, we discovered 100 people are vulnerable. Okay, government, you've given us water, but when what we've realized, people do not only need water in this area, they need electricity, they need education, they need better health facilities. But when these civil society organizations come out to air out these views, government sees them in a different light. You are working for foreign entities. You want to paint this government in a bad light. Why is this taking center stage? And is it the reason why we are in this debacle?
Now, it is strangely interesting that for every national action plan that the government has adopted.
Yes, Arthur.
When it comes to the stakeholders, it is clearly spelled out. Civil society organizations will do A, B, C. And in that A, B, C, there is monitoring and evaluation. But on top of that, they also say resource mobilization. I'll give a quick example of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights that the Ministry of Gender recently adopted in August. It says there will be civil society organizations and their role is to mobilize resources. And civil society does mobilize resources to fill that gap where governments cannot get. Civil societies have done a lot of work.
I guess what, when they see someone withdrawing $340,000, Nicholas Opio, I'll be like, okay, this is money laundering. What is the money for? You want to topple the government.
Now, unfortunately, I'm not sure whether that money was drawn, especially when the suit was withdrawn.
Yes.
Why drop the charges if you actually had cogent evidence?
Meaning they never
to that
did.
effect. I don't know. And unfortunately, still, our constitution empowers the DPP and leaves it at that in the constitution. We do not have other enabling laws for us to check the powers of the DPP because the DPP is independent. So each time a matter is withdrawn, we have lost interest. We never get the answers to the question, why lose interest at this time? And that's why even the alleged prosecutions that are initiated for the corrupt, and tomorrow the charges are withdrawn, when you hear the narrative from the public say, it is because they are big fish, do not blame the public. So civil society has a very big, important role to play.
Indeed, in the sphere of governance and accountability. And these are the two spheres that actually compound public social services. So why would government be adamant to not let these individuals within these civil society organizations lend them a hand in the advancement of better social services?
I hope government will answer that question. But my advice to government...
In the corners, what have you heard, Arthur?
Yes.
Where is there a shrinking civic space?
We do not have a culture of accountability.
Oh, yeah.
We are very thin on the virtue of integrity. We are very thin on the virtue of truthfulness.
I see.
And so, and this still goes back to the basics of our social fabric as a country, in our families, in our communities. Where we have a country that has people at the helm who do not want to be held accountable, they will always kick off or fight whoever is holding them accountable. So I think, or I would like to propose, that is the reason we are closing up the space on civil society.
So these are machinations of the corrupt at the top who do not want you to shine a light on what they are doing in the dark. Of course, when the big fish are roaming free, rearing their very ugly heads, the little fish will also play. That's why we are seeing corruption at the top, at the lower bottom. Wouldn't you believe that to be true?
That is very, very true. And the reason, I don't want to condone corruption.
Indeed.
I do not want to condone it. It is a vice, it is filthy, it stinks, it disgusts. A good number of people who say, let me do this, will tell you the reason I'm doing it is because somebody at the top has done it and they have gone scot-free. I'm saying I'm not condoning it, I'm not supporting it, but that is it. So until we take tangible action to send the message across the board and down the spiral, we shall continue grappling with these issues.
Go ahead.
So, when we come to the National Conference on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, we've come to make a case for strengthening of public services as one of the strategies of achieving this inclusive, sustainable, socio-economic recovery.
We shall also be examining the role of international community, including international finance.
International financing, very, very critical.
IMF.
IMF has been very generous with us as a country.
I see.
They will keep lending, they will keep giving us money. And IMF will tell you we ring fence this money for particular responses that will uplift the economy. The question is, after that money has been received, does that money actually go to the intended response?
I see.
What is IMF's role in monitoring the said monies? This is not free money. We are borrowing.
Indeed we are.
We are borrowing. There was that banter
so
on social media.
You borrow to cushion people, and the money does not go back to the people, and yet you're introducing new taxes onto the same people whom you are not helping to recover the money you borrowed. Jesus Christ.
Yes, a few months back, you remember the banter that went around on the debt that we have as a country, and people started saying, please, Ministry of Finance, send me my invoice such that I clear my 1 million, and going forward, do not borrow again without my consent. You know why people are talking that way? It's because they have not seen, they've not felt, and they cannot attest to the proceeds coming out of this borrowed money. So international financing needs to come to a point where they also monitor what the money does when it finally gets here. It does not help you keeping the tap open to sustain a small crop or percentage of unethical Ugandans at the expense of the intended wider disadvantaged, vulnerable chunk of Ugandans.
Let's also talk about how disadvantageous it would be to also close that gap because you've noticed some corruption. I've one too many times talked to these international donors and said, when you stop money from coming in our country simply because official X was corrupt, you're actually doing a big disservice to Ugandans. Simply change the person you're sending. I gave the analogy of someone who gave me a clarion call. Romeo Busiku, I need some food. I sent the messenger, disappeared with the food. What would I do? Would I say, no, I sent you the food, but then the messenger disappeared? I did my part, so please find another avenue through which you'll be receiving help. No, I'll change the messenger. I'll change the avenue through which I'm going to be giving you help. If it didn't work with the messenger, I'll go to mobile money. What is your number? Send you the money directly. So the international donors, instead of closing that tap and saying Ugandan officials are corrupt, so we shall not be giving you money, they could actually work with you as civil society, work with other individuals who are going to advance these social services to our people. Wouldn't you agree?
Romeo, I know that diplomacy under foreign service protocols and engagements, international law, etc., allow for us to mandate whoever is foreign to allow the powers that be in the domestic jurisdiction to run the affairs of their country.
Right.
And I know probably IMF cannot come out and say, from our investigations, from our findings, allow me to use your name, Romeo has been found culpable.
So we're not giving
money to Uganda. If you're going to receive any more money, can we see action taken against Romeo? I think that would change this narrative of money is being sent, money is being borrowed, and it is not doing what it is intended to do.
What we've seen is that some governments push back and they're like, you will not hold us onto ransom. You will not put conditions onto your aid. You won't be saying, okay, this needs to be done so that you could give us your money. That cannot be done. That's what governments have been doing to push back. So what the donors could do, I've been hearing from political experts, is that as you call for investigations into this individual, look for other avenues through which the people who are grappling can receive this money. Because as you waste time investigating this person, you're not wasting time, but for the people who are dying on the grassroots, it is time wasted. You are wasting time with this individual investing them. The people are dying on the ground. So as you investigate, concurrently ensure that money is still streaming to the grassroots and the people are still being helped.
Romeo, allow me to sound radical.
Please go ahead.
I think that there comes a point where you say, enough
is enough.
Is enough. Turn off that tap and let the citizenry hold their government accountable for services that are no longer coming through.
I see. Wouldn't that be a recipe? Wouldn't that be a recipe for disaster where people rise up against their same governments because of the deteriorating economic situation? Because that's what I was trying to avert. Because when you stop the money from coming in, we grapple as citizens and then we hold government to account. War takes center stage.
Well, I'm a lawyer and I will ground my arguments in the law.
Go ahead.
You've heard of Article 3 of the Constitution that gives citizens the power and the right to hold this government accountable by any means legal. Even an uprising, a demonstration is legal given the circumstances. Every time we return to an election, 5 years, every time we turn to an election, there is an opportunity for the citizenry to say, you have not delivered on your mandate. But if we're in a country where the ambulance system is run by members of parliament, and not parliament as an institution, but individuals. If we're in a system where roofing of schools is done by members of parliament, then I think we have degenerated and we have lost the touch with public services and social services and the primary duty of the state. So, yes, turn off the tap. The citizenry will call the government to account. If the government fails to account, the citizenry will withdraw their mandate.
Arthur, yes, thank you very much. We are talking about the 8th Annual Conference on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It's being held under the theme Reclaiming Public Services for Inclusive and Sustainable Economic Recovery Efforts After COVID-19. That's what we are talking about right now. What is the silver bullet for this? What is the recommendation that will be coming in from the civil society organizations, courtesy of the 8th Annual Conference on Socio-Economic and Cultural Rights, to avert this situation of, public services that are degenerating?
The big message, before I go to the big message, it is important for our viewers to know what is laid out for them today and tomorrow. It is a 2-day conference that is going to run live at NTV from 2 o'clock to 5 p.m. This afternoon we have a keynote address by Professor John Jean Barrier of the School of Law, Macquarie University, which will be followed by a panel discussion on maintaining health and education as public goods, not as private economic goods. Then day 2 we shall have a panel discussion to talk about the role of the citizen and their participation in ensuring quality of public services. And I guess that will answer the other question, what do we do then if we turn off the tap?
It is their constitutional right to demand for these services, to come out and say, government, we are grappling under this COVID-19, where is the help to cushion us? Government, 100,000 Uganda shillings is too little, we need more help or more money. It is their constitutional right. But so many people do not know this.
And then we also have a panel to discuss.
You have politicians who are saying, no, the 100,000 is a donation from the government. We are helping you. Taxpayers' money, imagine.
Can we stop thinking that government is doing us a favor for services rendered to us? Government is not doing us a favor. Government, it is fulfilling a mandate. It assumed it is fulfilling a mandate under a social contract between us and them. So we shall also be discussing electricity and ICT. Or internet for that matter, and how essential those two services are post-COVID-19, electricity and internet.
Even during this COVID-19 pandemic, it's really, really important that the government, magnifies its role when it comes to the development process, not only focusing on the market, but also its role as the government. When it comes to ICT, what are we doing to ensure that our students continue their learning and so forth?
You had the pain of people who lost their lives because suddenly the electricity blacks out and the systems cannot run to afford them the oxygen.
I'm going to task you more on that conversation. Let's first go to Stephen Mbide. He's in downtown Kampala talking to some of the traders. In the city centre, they are grappling with that 30% tax that were levied. Also, the landlords are also grappling with another rental tax income that forced them to even raise the rental fees in that regard. So you do have people who are not largely operating. Now the government is instituting a set of new taxes and so forth as of July. Arthur Nsereko is still here. We'd like to talk about the magic bullet that could go a long way in alleviating this challenge. If government cannot tax Ugandans to smithereens, what could be the other avenue through which they could mobilize resources or money to be able to front or fund government programs in that regard? Arthur.
Just one message from the chairperson of the traders and the lady that spoke last. The chairperson says, twawulira finance ne tubulira ne URA ne bagana otuwuliriza. We spoke with finance, we spoke with URA, they chose not to listen. The lady in black says they should just listen to us. And for me, that is the magic bullet. If we're going to improve an inclusive, resilient, sustainable public service, listen to the people who are part of this real economy. There is that superfluous economy we're talking about, but we are talking of the real economy. Besides
listening to them, Arthur Nsereko, before I let you go, what other recommendations do you have so that we could alleviate this challenge? Between 800,000 to 2.6 million people are going to be poor as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic, post-COVID-19. What could we do right now?
I actually don't want to dictate the recommendations. I want to invite everybody to be a part of this conference. It will run on NTV, but there is also people that will tune in through Zoom. There is a link that is going around. Kindly tune in and let's add our voice and craft the recommendations as citizens of this country. And so we'll be glad to share those recommendations at the end of the conference, which happens tomorrow. The end is tomorrow, but the start is today. Today and tomorrow, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., NTV Live.
Arthur Nsereko, when this COVID-19 pandemic hit, I was thinking and praying maybe government will open its eyes to the deteriorating health situation, the education sector, the ICT sector, and the services sector all alike. But guess what? We were surprised. Government has continued to actually put a deaf ear onto these problems.
And it is the reason ISA, Public Interest Law Clinic, the School of Law, the Uganda Consortium of Corporate Accountability, FIDA Uganda, and Akina Mama of Africa have put resources together. They've put this idea together, and we are focusing on social services because of what has hit us.
The 8th National Conference on Socio-Economic and Cultural Rights, under the theme Reclaiming Social Services for an Inclusive and Sustainable Recovery After COVID-19. My name is Rome Busiku.